Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to the Remote No Pressure podcast. I'm so glad that you decided to stop by and join us this week for another awesome episode. We have an unbelievable guest, as we do every week. You know, it never ceases to amaze me the amount of stories that are out there. And maybe you have a story, or maybe you know someone who has a great story that we should share. Email me at jefft@remotenopressure.com, and we would love to hear from them. The reason we started out this podcast, because oftentimes I have to remind myself, you know, why do I do this every week? Why do I come here? Why do I host the interviews? Why do we edit them and put them out? And I just remind myself of that time when I was in corporate America and I was extremely burned out. And I went and saw a professional to get some professional help. And she said, "Jeff, you need a hobby." And that's when I discovered fly fishing. I'd done it here and there, you know, but I never really took it seriously, never really did it. And when I did that, it really, really, really helped me focus. It really helped me deal with that stress. Now, this week, I just want to share a little bit about the stress and things that are going on in society. And it was funny because thriveglobal.com, and I think that's Ariana Huffington's online magazine, they published an article, and I'll put this up on our website, about how doctors are burning out at surprisingly high rates. Doctors and medical professionals, but doctors in particular. And actually almost two-thirds of the doctors in the United States say they are burned out, depressed, or both. And the article is pretty wild and pretty amazing, because I never really thought about how stressful being a physician could be. I never thought about it because I've never really wanted to be a doctor. I'm not familiar. I've got a couple friends who are in the medical profession. One friend is an ER doctor. And, you know, I have a couple friends that are in the profession, but I never really thought much about it and how stressful it could possibly be. And it's kind of crazy to know that 2/3 of the people who are telling us to take medication, 2/3 of the people that are telling us that are taking care of our health, that we trust our health to, are burned out. I hate to hear that. If you're a physician out there and you're burned out and stressed, man, I just really feel for you. I hate that you're going through that. And what I didn't know is that actually that profession has the highest rate of suicide of any other profession, actually 3 to 5 times higher, 3 to 5 times higher than the general public. The stress level is just so much. And you know what? It's stories like that. It's stories like this. When I see things in the community, when I see things in our culture that just drives us to excellence, drives us to do our best and no compromise, just go, and just get completely stressed out, then I'm reminded why I sit behind the microphone here at remotenopressure.com and talk to people about the stress they're going to, talk to them about fly fishing, how it helped them in life. I'm reminded, and I'm just get geeked and I get excited about it. And it's just amazing. It's just amazing. And as all of you people know that listen to this podcast, you probably fly fish and you use it to deal with stress. That's just the way it is. Today's guest is amazing. We have Mr. Chris Barclay from Barclay Fly Rods. He makes his own custom fly rods. Amazing guy, amazing story. How he went from almost selling prepaid funerals to making his own fly rods. Welcome to the podcast. Let's light the fire. Today on the Remote No Pressure podcast, we have Chris Barclay. Thank you very much for joining us, Chris.
Thanks, Jeff. I'm glad to be here.
Now, before we get started, you are a lumberjack. You are a graduate of Stephen F. Austin State University, correct?
That's correct. Yeah, fighting lumberjacks.
Yeah, the fighting. They were actually in the in March Madness a couple years back, and I was really rooting for them. They lost by like 2 points and got kicked out.
Yeah. I hear they did really, really well. And most time when I say that I went to Stephen F. Austin, people refer to that. And unfortunately, I don't know hardly anything about sports. So I just try to go along and nod my head and keep on trying to keep up with the conversation.
Yeah, I live in Michigan now, and it's funny because and I've worked in sales pretty much like my whole life, and I had a friend of mine with me, and we were at this trade show, and he goes, "How do you talk to everybody?" And I said, "Watch this." And it was just after Harbaugh came to Michigan to as a football coach. And so I just go out
Oh
to
yeah.
people and what do you guys think about Harbaugh? And that's all I'd have to say. And I don't know a whole lot about football, but it didn't matter. They just kept talking and talking and
That's
talking.
fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. If you know how to ask good questions, you can carry on just about anything.
Yeah, it's pretty it's pretty crazy. But
That's great.
you don't like basketball too much, but you told me before we started here that you don't listen to a lot of podcasts, but you listen to music. Is there any music in particular that you enjoy listening to, or any artist that you're listening to right now?
Oh yeah, yeah. Actually, I got to see my favorite artist of all time last weekend with my son for my son's 10th birthday. A guy named Charlie Parr from Minnesota. He's just a singer songwriter, but mainly old style blues. Just him and his guitar. He plays a resonator or a 12 string, and he's I've gotten to know him over the years a little bit. Just a really great, humble guy. Uh, Looks like he's homeless, and a lot of his songs are about homeless people
Wow.
and sort of compassionate.
Hmm.
And so it's very eye opening and enlightening. Uh, Enjoy his music, I think.
Well, being from Texas, I thought you were going to say Robert Earl Keen was your favorite artist because
Oh,
singer
I
songwriter.
I I I do enjoy him. I do enjoy Robert Earl Keen. I love Lyle Lovett. My first truck that I bought while I was in high school was a Toyota 4x4, and I named him Lyle. And we had some fantastic adventures together. And probably should have never sold that truck.
That's awesome. So I really appreciate you coming on the show. I appreciate you giving us your time. And I wanted to talk to you a little bit about what you're up to. But before that, can you tell us a little bit about how you got into fly fishing, Chris? Have you always done it your whole life, or what? How
No,
did
I
you get into
haven't.
it?
I got into it sort of in bits and pieces. My first exposure to it was a neighbor down the street would go to Colorado. I grew up in Houston, just north of Houston, Texas, and the neighbor down the street would go fishing, um, fly fishing in Colorado. And every summer he would get out his fly rod and stand in the middle of the street and practice casting. And when he was out there, I was always practicing casting with my bait casting rigs because I loved bass fishing. And even when I was about 12, I started fishing tournaments.
Wow.
I would just kind of hop on people's boats, and I was just a little preteen and teenage little boy uh, sleeping in these terrible, terrible motels that smelled like coffee and cigar smoke, and go fish with them. And I loved it, but there was something missing from fishing those tournaments and things, and I kind of missed the slow bluegill fishing that I did with my grandma growing up, and somebody I remembered that man in the middle of the street casting a fly rod, and then when I got into college, around when my wife and I got married during college, I picked up a fly rod that I had bought years before and never used, and caught some bass and some bluegill in a little East Texas pond, and just absolutely fell in love with fly fishing. It was a slow pace. It was a deliberate pace. It was just an intentional way of fishing that you took into account all the processes of everything from presentation to bug life to what the wind is doing, because you can't cast in a super windy situation, and all kinds of things. And it just clicked.
Where at in East Texas were you?
I was at Ratcliffe State Park, um, or state recreation area, and it, it was, I forget how much of a drive, probably half an hour drive from Nacogdoches, and just absolutely loved it there. I'd go camping there. I would fish with conventional fishing rigs, bass fishing rigs there. But when the first time I really caught any fish with a fly rod, I don't think I ever picked up another uh, anything else besides the fly rod when I went there. I had this little belly boat, a little float tube kind of boat, but it was made out of a hard ABS plastic and filled with styrofoam I bought from a man in Houston when I was about 10. And I carried it with me all through college. And people saw me in there. And by that time, I was about 6'1", 6'2", or something like that, trying to fit my long legs in there. I looked like I was sitting in an igloo cooler.
That's awesome.
And people would scoot up to me in their canoes and say, "What in the world are you sitting in?" I'm like, I don't even know what to call it, but it's a float tube. And it literally looked like a cooler.
Wow.
And but it got me everywhere.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it was fun.
Yeah, my grandparents lived in Alto, Texas, which is not
No
far
way.
from Ratcliffe. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I
I
remember
spent a lot of time in Alto,
Texas. Not a lot of people know about Ratcliffe and Alto, Texas. But I remember driving. They had this giant steel Oldsmobile, and I would lay in the back seat because there were just like one long seat, and we'd go over those big hills on the highway, just up and down, and up and down, and I would just drift off to sleep.
Yeah. Oh man, that's wonderful.
Yeah, that's great. I don't think people really understand, and I didn't understand when I grew up in Texas, in Houston, south of Houston though, not the north side.
Okay.
But I didn't really know. I moved away in 2002, and I didn't really understand that how much fly fishing has grown in Texas. That it's not just for dry flies and brook trout anymore. I mean, there's a lot of diversity there in Texas.
There's a huge fly fishing culture there. It's literally exploded since I was there, and I was there for 2 weeks at the beginning of this month.
Wow.
Visiting family and driving around, and I got to fish the Llano and Brushy Creek, and all my family's in the Cedar Park and Round Rock areas, and my wife's family's up in Dallas. But got to just see some of that culture, and it's fantastic.
That's really awesome.
I love how there's some of it revolving around the tailwaters on the Guad, but the warm water fly fishing culture there is inspiring.
Wow. Yeah, even those Guadalupe bass are just a gorgeous species of fish.
Yeah, I got to catch some a few weeks ago, and they're not big, but man, it just makes me giggle. I just love it.
Well, tell us. So you started fishing there in Ratcliffe and the camp there, and your igloo cooler, and now you're making your own rods. Like you have your own rod company. How did you get from fishing out of a pretty much an igloo cooler into making your own rods?
Oh, it is a crazy little story.
Let's hear it.
I still can't believe that I get to build fly rods.
Wow.
And just go fishing. I'm essentially paid to go fishing somehow. But when I was probably some of my very earliest memories are fishing, and fishing mainly with my grandma in Mississippi and outside of Vicksburg. And I grew up spending a lot of my summers there, and we would just strap cane poles to the top of her Buick, her big old Oldsmobile Buick kind of thing. But it's like driving a big old cruise ship, like you were talking about in Alto. And we would strap the cane poles onto there and just go out to the catfish pond on my uncle's land, and that's where my fishing started. And from the very first moments of that, when I was about 3, when I had some kind of understanding of occupation, I said, I'm going to be a fisherman when I grow up. And
wow.
I just whether that meant being a fishing guide, a biologist, or whatever, I wanted to fish, and it took a lot to get there. It didn't just go straight there, but um, I just wanted to be a fisherman somehow, some way. But I guess essentially, I there were times where I didn't pick up a rod for years, and mainly in later high school and early college. I had plenty of time in college to mess around, but I got into mountain biking real big. Raced the Texas circuit and the Southern circuit and Central circuit, and did well. And wanted to be a professional mountain biker for a little while, but that didn't last. So I went back to the fishing part. But when I guess when my wife and I got married in 1998, I was getting closer to finding the major in college that I was going to do, and she's a couple of years younger than me and was about to graduate, so she laughed at me. And she graduated with her master's, and I graduated with my bachelor's at the same time. Which, I'm not a proud man. I can go along with that pretty easily. She's an amazing person. But she just always encouraged me to fish. Her dad fishes a lot, does a lot of trolling for stripers and things like that, which is a lot of fun in and of itself. But I guess when I fly fishing came in when I needed a good healthy distraction. When I needed to, I guess, deal with outside circumstances that I didn't know how to deal with, like mainly responsibilities, life, and what we call adulting these days. It helps me to be more responsible somehow. I guess maybe some other people might not think I was so responsible, but that's okay. They're not here right now. So I started fly fishing in 1998 in Texas, and then a few years later, in 2001, we moved to St. Louis, Missouri, for me to go to school up there to try. Since I did so poorly in college, I decided to torture myself a little bit in graduate school, and that didn't last very long at all. And significant. Right after we moved to St. Louis, my grandmother died. My best friend passed away. We had a good cat that ran away and died, and that was the beginning of some pretty severe depression for me. Which, looking back, it makes sense that I dealt with depression pretty seriously before then, but it was at that point when it was able to be pinpointed, and we decided that it's best that I don't follow through with school. But we found a good church in St. Louis, and just felt like home there. We felt like it was a sort of a safe place for us. And then we just kind of lived, just didn't have any goals, didn't have anything else. We just kind of lived there, and I started doing a little bit of fishing around that area, and discovered the Missouri trout parks, which are just a crazy phenomenon. And it was. Are you familiar with those?
Yeah, they're in the south. They're southern Missouri. Am I right? Like south. Yeah. Yep. I'm very familiar with them. Yes.
They so they have something like 7 o'clock in the morning and a giant air raid siren, and that's no joke. A real live air raid siren sounds telling you that you could start casting. You can be standing in the water, but you can't be fishing. So when the air raid siren goes off, you're shoulder to shoulder with these folks, And if you catch a fish, you better be prepared to be pushed out of the way because somebody's going to step in there right then. And 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 you'll see fish guts floating down the river as people clean their fish as they catch them and stick them in their creel or whatever. And that was my very first experience with trout fishing. I thought, this is not for me. I know that it has a good place, and I know that people really enjoy it. And a lot of folks get or feed their families that way, which is fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
But I was like, this is not wild. This is not freeing. It's not anything like fishing at Ratcliffe State Park out of a igloo cooler. And so I was like, I'm not doing trout fishing. This stinks. I'm out of here. And but then a friend of mine said, there are these wild streams around there that are pretty cool. You ought to try those, give those a shot. So I did, and just fell in love with it because there are these little a series of little spring creeks running through the southern middle of Missouri that they were stocked with rainbow trout from the cloud strain trout from California via rail car in the early 1900s.
Wow.
And they've sustained. A few of the sections are still stocked, but the wild places are still wild. And the fish are incredibly beautiful. And they act like real fish. They don't act like they're a piece of rubber with some fins on it. And they'll rise to flies. They will act properly when it comes to hatches and where they're supposed to be. And I learned a lot there. And that's when I started. Sometime along there is when I started building fly rods. I worked. I guess it's a pattern for me. In college, I had a bunch of different majors, and after college, I had a bunch of different jobs, a ton of jobs. I worked as a carpenter and sign builder in college. My first job offer out of college was to sell prearranged funerals. That was the first job offer. I did not take that though. My wife, who knew me, said, "You will not take that job." I said, "But it's my first offer. I gotta at least consider it." And she's like, "I know you. That will kill you." So I didn't end up selling prearranged funerals. I worked for an electrician right off the bat, and was shipped all over Central and East Texas, working for them, and then that's when I decided to go up to St. Louis and go to school there, and I continued in construction up there doing. That's where I learned more of the fine woodworking aspects of carpentry, building cabinets, and doing special trim work and additions and things like that for kitchens and bookshelves and all that kind of stuff. And I loved the solitude of the fine woodworking because I could think through what I needed to do. I could make a plan and enjoy the process of building it. And then I'd have a customer who loved it and could enjoy it for years and years and years after that. And but after a few years of that, after I guess several years of that, my back just couldn't handle it anymore. Partly because we were doing a total gut rehab on a 1907 house in inner city St. Louis. I was basically doing the work, carpentry work during the day, then coming home and working till about midnight or 1 o'clock, and I did that for about 2 years, and finally my body just gave out.
Wow.
And I said, I got to find something else. And so after that, I worked for a custom closet company as a salesman, and I was the only guy salesman. There were two other Chris's in there, but they were women, and I was the only dude in there except for the guys doing the installs. And I was more comfortable with the installers than anybody else there, but somehow I got the job and I worked there for 2.5 years, basically selling closet organization, which
Wow.
it's a minor miracle I made it out of there because I am not organized. I I my job was to keep people organized, and it was amazing, and I was a miserable failure at it. I just kept on getting worse and worse and worse, not getting better, and they finally just said, Chris, maybe you should find something different to do with your life.
Wow.
And I
Wow.
said, I think you're right. And after that, I actually ended up back at the school that I moved to St. Louis to go to, Covenant Seminary, and was the maintenance supervisor there for, I guess, 6.5, 7 years. And at first, it was a really good job because I got to teach people how to do construction, uh, everyday construction sort of things. A lot of students coming in that didn't know how to do things, so I helped them, and we maintained the buildings and things like that. But it ended up being a very, very difficult job with a very, very difficult sort of narcissistic boss who I felt like I was dying there.
Wow.
But that's when I started building fly rods. Um, in the evenings, a friend of mine told me, he's like, you'd really enjoy building fly rods with your carpentry background. And I was like, no, I don't want to do that. I don't want to turn a hobby that I love doing that's respite for me. I don't want to turn that into something I need to do. I want to be able to afford to pay for my own stuff without having to make it. All my life, I've been a do-it-yourself kind of person, and I didn't want to do it myself for fly fishing. I wanted to be able to pay for it without worry or having to create it myself.
Right.
Um, but then my wife said, Chris, you should really build a fly rod. I finally said, okay, finally, I guess I will. and I did. A friend of mine off of one of the fly fishing forums online, he had built some rods, and he said he would kind of guide me a little bit. So he wrote out a couple of emails worth of tips on where to start. And after my first rod, I was like, where has this been all my life? I just fell in love. It made fly fishing fresh and new, and it gave me a different perspective on it.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt like I don't do well not getting enough sleep,
Mm-hmm.
but I would work on a rod after everybody went to bed till about 1 or 2 in the morning, wake up at 6, and work on it a little bit more before work, and then go fish at a little pond outside of St. Louis just to catch some bluegill on that rod. And it really brought fly fishing home to me.
Wow.
Even more.
Wow.
Being able to put a creative, I guess artistic. I didn't really think of it as artistic at the time, but an artistic bent on it.
Sure. Sure.
And it just steamrolled from there. Everything that I did was and thought about had something to do with building a rod. And it was hard for me to find blanks that I was happy with to build on. And I got my hands on a Mike McFarland blank, rod designer and maker from Pennsylvania, and just loved it. And it was fiberglass. It was a fiberglass blank that just had the kind of feel that I loved. It was slower. It was more deliberate. It was reflective of what fly fishing is to me. A very clear and deliberate and artistic process, and that's why I loved the way fiberglass felt to me. And so I started searching out people to make blanks for me to my designs, just what I had in my mind.
Mm-hmm.
And after some failed attempts, I found a good friend of mine in Japan offered to help me get my foot in the door at a Japanese blank maker. And that that taught me a lot about design. Talking with him and talking with that company, and I don't know Japanese at all, but the way we would communicate, if I wanted, I would tell them I want a blank a certain way, and they would send me a prototype, and I would have one of my kids shoot a cheesy iPhone video on me casting it and bending it, and I would point to various areas of the rod and say I want it to be stronger here or lighter here, and just use percentages. Say plus percent here, minus percent here, and that's how we designed the blanks. Then we eventually got into more detailed roll counts and things like that of how it should be built.
Mm.
But that's how I started. I got into, I guess, designing rods, and it was fascinating the way this happened. When I was working at the seminary, they were about to go through some layoffs and things like that, and right at that same time, I had I had just completed and purchased the first run of my very first series of blanks, which was a 7-foot 2-inch 3-weight, and sort of a light brown, transparent. It looked like a brown ale sort of color, so I called it the brown ale color. A lot of people can relate to beer, so and I know I can. So, and actually, little side note, I sent the Japanese friend a picture of I think a Newcastle that I was drinking. I said, I want the blanks to be that color, and so they laughed at me and thought I wasn't serious, I think, but they did it anyway. It worked.
Nice. Yeah, the minute you said that, I knew exactly the color you were talking about.
Yeah, it's illustrative.
Yes.
But right when I got those blanks in, I was laid off from that job, and it was devastating because it was a very rough transition, and I couldn't find a job at all. And my wife and I spent that time looking for jobs and building rods, and this was not too long after I built my very first rod, maybe a couple of years at the most. And so I built up the first 10 of those 7-foot 2-inch 3-weights, and I talked to Valerie, and I was like, well, let's see how this goes. And I listed them for sale at 8:00 one night. By the next morning, they were all sold out.
Wow.
And we were just floored. And I built another batch of them and started getting orders for them. And then they sold out.
Wow.
And it just kept happening. And I started designing a few more tapers to add to that series, the 7-foot 8-inch 4-weight and the 7-10 5-weight, all fiberglass in the same brown ale color. And those started gaining orders and sales, and we and I was doing handyman work to fill in, just help pay bills, and we were just barely struggling along. But we started looking at the finances and thought, well, if I could keep this up, this could turn into a real job. And I probably worked. Well, there's really no way for me to tell how many hours a week I worked. I'd probably rather not count anyway. But it was just incredible the response for that, and it just very quickly and very organically turned into a job, a
Wow.
job that I absolutely loved, and actually felt like I was finally doing what I was meant to do,
Wow.
and which just was just icing on the cake in so many different ways.
Wow. And the thing is you weren't even looking for it to happen. It just kind of naturally happened. Where did you put them up for sale, on Craigslist or something, or where did you put them
Um,
up for sale?
there's a few online forums, like the Fiberglass Fly Rodders forum, Ultralight Fly Fishing forum, Classic Fly Rod forum, and a little bit on social media, Facebook, and wasn't doing Instagram back then.
Wow.
Um, and mainly word of mouth. People, occasionally I'd build a demo and send it out to a gathering of people that I knew was going to happen, or I'd try to go out to a gathering and people would cast the rods and say, "Hey, these are great. You're
Wow.
not charging much. I'll buy this one, and whatever you come up with next, I'll buy too."
Wow.
And man, it really started to get a little bit out of control, and um, it was interesting because it was all interesting, but it was partly interesting because the fly rod building community is small.
Mm-hmm.
The fiberglass fly rod building community is minuscule. It's like a micro niche within a pretty small niche as it is.
Wow.
And so just this newcomer coming in and uh, just doing so much all at once. I thought I was going to be not very well received, but I was.
Wow.
People really just welcomed me, which it definitely was not just me. It was just the personality of the community,
Mm.
the culture,
Mm-hmm.
and which is just beautiful. And of course, within fishing, there's always some crusty old people. And by old, I mean at any age, somebody can be a crusty old person. And they'll be naysayers, but they were more helpful than anything. They helped me form an identity and hone my intentions, not just be a loose cannon to build as many rods as I can to make as much money as I can.
Right.
It turned into a real relationship between people.
Mm.
And now I've probably built almost 1,000 rods at this point, and that's from I think I built my first rod in 2011.
Wow.
So it really hasn't been all that long, but uh, and just about anywhere I go, I've got a friend that that'll show me fishing that I can go grab a beer with or get a coffee with or something like that.
Sure.
And 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 what I've realized it kind of turned out organically. The whole mission of my little rod company is to help people enjoy fishing, and that's sort of when somebody asks me what's my goal in all this, not just to make a good fishing rod. I want to increase people's enjoyment of fly fishing
Mm.
and creation, and get get people out there, and if I hear somebody sticking my rod under a glass case and putting a light on it. Somebody told me that recently. I said, I'm going to go sneak into your house and make sure you go fishing with it. That's what it's for.
Right.
And one of the highlights is meeting up with the folks that I build rods for and hand delivering it to them and going fishing with them afterwards. That's just an incredible feeling.
I can imagine. Now, let me ask you this question. You had mentioned, just to go back a little bit, you worked a lot of different jobs. You said a lot of different jobs before you found the fly fishing, the fly rod building. What was the worst job you ever had, Chris?
Oh man, the worst job I could have had, I foresee being the prearranged funeral salesman, but I didn't do that one. I didn't actually do that, so let me think a little bit harder. I would have to say working for one of the electrical companies that I did right outside of college. There's a interesting situation. It seems like there's always a story for something. At least there is with me. That's what my kids tell me, at least. But there's this one time we were wiring up the one of the residence halls at Stephen F. Austin State University in Nacogdoches, and so it was the summer. It was hot, East Texas, humid, just miserable. And I saw this one guy giving something to another guy in a small form, and then it was some kind of drugs that I was just going to turn my back. But then I was running some live power with the one guy, and he ended up almost killing all of us.
Wow.
With because of the he flipped the switch because he wasn't thinking right, and I couldn't. I don't know. I guess I just couldn't let that fly. So I mentioned it to my supervisor. He's like, "Oh, I'll take care of it." And then the way he took care of it was he got me and him and the other guy that I saw that was involved, and got us all in a circle and said, "He saw you doing drugs. Is that true?"
Oh my gosh.
And and I was like, I may be college educated, but that does not matter in this situation. I know that this should not be going down like this. And I made good friends with another guy on the job who was a very accomplished martial artist. And he got wind of what was going on. He's like, "Okay, so you can transfer out. We're gonna stick together." And the one guy that dealt the drugs ended up chasing me down with one of those long screwdrivers.
Oh my.
And my buddy that was the electrical ninja, he ended up taking him down as he was trying to chase me down with this screwdriver.
Oh my.
And so that was a low point, I would say.
Why do you think you had so many jobs? What were you searching for?
Oh man, that's a good question. I guess I was searching for maybe I guess at the core purpose, like something that I really felt like I could do, be fulfilled, and fulfill for others, and or not fulfill for others, but help people enjoy something. One of the degrees that I tried to have was health science. I wanted to be a physical therapist or something. and but that had a whole lot of math, science, and stuff in it, so I bailed on that one. Uh, but uh, I don't know. I wanted to I, I wanted to help people, but I wanted to be helped as well. I felt like I needed something like that. And I guess every time I turn around, this has something to do with who I am and how I've gotten to where I am. And that is that when I was born in Norway, and my dad was a geologist for Exxon, and and when I was about a year and a half, he was diagnosed with cancer, skin cancer, and he worked out on oil rigs as a geologist, and he grew up in South America, um, and so he was out on the beaches and in the sun all the time with very fair skin, and so he contracted skin cancer when he was about 38, and back in the late 70s, that was melanoma was a death sentence just about.
Wow.
And Exxon moved us to excuse me, to Houston for him to be treated. And then when we got settled in Houston and things like that, but he passed away when I was just over 2 years old. And that essentially, I never knew my dad, and I really wonder if that has something to do with the searching that I've done. I know that it's been a struggle being a father myself as well as being a husband. But I know that that somewhere in there's a significant piece of who I am that is still a hole, because I never did know my dad. But I know people have had horrible experiences with their fathers, which makes me real sad. But there's other folks who have incredible relationships, and I look at them and I think about Father's Day, and I think about all that stuff, and wonder, well, what would it be like if my dad had not passed away? And so that, I don't know, that's probably the thing that is in the back of my mind at almost every moment. In how I learn, how I process, how I get to where I'm going, scholastically, as well as with all the various jobs I've had. I always had, my mom has been tremendously supportive about anything that I wanted to do. And she knew that I think I was very recreational at heart. and whoops. And just being a recreational person, and that likes to work with their hands. And so I guess that could open up so many different doors.
Yeah, I mean that's
and
interesting.
close some doors too.
Yeah, for sure. And that's an interesting statement you said about how it's always in the back of your mind. I can't imagine going through that loss at such a young age, and what you've overcome to become who you are. And yeah, that's great. Now, Chris, if someone wanted to find out more about your company and your fly rods and who you are, how would they go about doing that?
Well, I have a fairly active, I guess, social media arena. Facebook. My Facebook page is Barclay Fly Rod Company, and same with Instagram, and I think Twitter too, but not much. But most everything is accessible through my website, which is cbarclayflyrods.com. And there's a contact form on there. That's probably the best way to reach me. I try to be responsive, but I find that I'm technologically inept sometimes. So every now and then something will fall through the cracks, and I hopefully I'll find it eventually. But that the website's pretty much the best way, and the phone number on there is my cell phone number. So usually I can take a text or email or phone call if I'm not dealing with varnish or something like that at the moment.
Well, great. Well, we'll put all those links up on the show notes so people can find you and learn more about your rods and just the passion that you have behind that. And I just want to say, from all of us, just thank you so much, Chris, for being so gracious and giving us some of your time.
Oh, well, thank you. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Chris, and thank you for joining us on another episode of the Remote No Pressure podcast. Be sure to check out our website at remotenopressure.com, also our Facebook page, and leave us a review. It always helps. And until next time, go fishing.